today we're tackling a character who embodies access in every possible way.
Charlie Harper, a character so committed to pleasure seeking that he probably made Hugh Hefner look like a monk.
Alright everyone, welcome back to Real Philosophy. This is where we deep dive into philosophical dimensions of your and our favorite screen characters. I'm Vishal, and today we're tackling a character who embodies access in every possible way. And there is no way we can do this episode without a beer in our hands. So cheers.
Cheers to that, Vishal. I'm Mohit, guys. Before we start, Vishal, just want to understand, how's life treating you? Are you feeling particularly hedonistic lately?
Well, I had to binge watch many episodes for some research for this particular episode. And after running around for 4 to 5 episodes, I started considering trading my sensible hatchback for a convertible and my measly apartment for a Malibu beach house. But
Cheers
then,
to
of
that.
course, I checked my bank account and I remembered why we are preaching philosophy here and not changing our lifestyles. But yeah, as they say, philosophers who write philosophies are much poorer than people who read philosophy.
Well said. Well, I live in Goa, and while the proximity to the beach and the ridiculously low-priced beer has the potential to veer me towards a Charlie-go-lucky lifestyle, I am a married man.
Oh well, now you've let the cat out of the bag, Mohit. So everyone, strap in, or rather, don't get too pissed drunk. As today we're analyzing Charlie Harper, for the favorite man in our 2.5 Men, the jingle writing, womanizing, beer guzzling, and cocktail sipping, embodiment of hedonism, and the guy who made us question all our life choices for 12 seasons.
12 seasons, so you're counting the Ashton Kutcher seasons as well.
No, let me correct myself. A man who made us question all our choices for 8 seasons.
That sounds accurate. So Charlie Harper, a character so committed to pleasure seeking that he probably made Hugh Hefner look like a monk. I have to say, when I first watched the show, I was simultaneously appalled and amused by his lifestyle, but mostly envious. Yeah, envious, I think.
Envious indeed, yeah. And this potpourri of emotions that you feel towards him, this is what makes him a fascinating character, right? So on the surface, he's so one-dimensional. He's just a guy pursuing pleasure at all costs, right? But now that we've been doing this research, we've figured out there's a rich philosophical landscape to explore here.
Absolutely. I mean, today we're keeping it tight with 3 main philosophical frameworks, guys. It's hedonism, existential nihilism, and Machiavellian social strategy. And as always, we'll wrap up with our favorite Charlie Harper moments, and God knows there's plenty, right? By the way, we should let our viewers and our listeners know that we're both wearing, or at least that's our attempt at, a bowling shirt.
Yes.
Of course, you can't see our shorts
Yes.
and the loafers below. You would have known that we are trying to go full Charlie Sheen on you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So everyone, if you have a bowling shirt, grab your bowling shirts, pour yourself a drink before noon, without judgment, the way we are doing, and join us as we explore the surprising philosophical depth of television's most unapologetic hedonist.
So unapologetic that it actually got him fired. But let's do it. So see, guys, when we talk about Charlie Harper, we have to start with hedonism, right? The philosophy that pleasure is the highest good and the proper aim of human life. Like, hedonism takes its roots from an age-old philosophy of Epicureanism.
But it gets interesting, right? The hedonism that Charlie is pursuing or embodying is quite different from philosophers like Epicurus were advocating, right? This guy who lived around 300 BC, if I'm not wrong, is often misunderstood as advocating for wild indulgence. But his version of hedonism was actually about moderation and finding sustainable pleasure.
That's correct. I mean, Epicurus believed in what he called ataraxia, which is freedom from fear and absence of pain, and aponia, which is the absence of physical pain. He thought the best life was one of simple pleasures, close friendships, and philosophical contemplation.
Meanwhile, like contrast this to what Charlie Harper is trying to do. This is what philosophers would call quantitative hedonism. The idea that more pleasure equals more happiness. More women, more alcohol, more expensive stuff means more happiness.
Remember that episode where Charlie gets high on pot and
Yeah.
then imagines all the women he hasn't called, and it results in a hilarious scene where each of them complain endlessly, driving him out of his room only to bump into his arch nemesis Rose.
Yeah, and this is one of the instances where the show gets philosophically interesting, right? His pursuit of maximum pleasure is actually making him miserable in so many ways, right? He is constantly dealing with hangovers, his failed relationships, angry exes, and sometimes even financial stress.
It's like that concept, right? It's called the hedonic treadmill concept, which is the psychological theory that humans quickly return to a relatively stable level of happiness despite major positive or negative life changes. Like Charlie keeps chasing bigger thrills because the previous ones no longer satisfy him.
Yeah.
But he doesn't realize that he's bound to come back to normalcy irrespective of the magnitude or frequency of rush he chases.
And this coming back to normalcy, I think this is why the character resonates with a lot of viewers, at least with us. Despite his seemingly enviable lifestyle, the Malibu beach, the millions of dollars, we see the emptiness, right? And the show occasionally gives the glimpses that Charlie is alone, that he's lonely. Like when we see him playing piano alone after everyone has gone to bed, we sort of try connect with, that money or maximizing pleasure may not be the answer.
That's correct. I mean, in those quiet moments, Charlie seems to understand that Epicurus might have been right after all. That meaningful connections and simpler pleasures might be more fulfilling than another one night
Yeah.
stand.
But then, as it happens, you get caught in a loop, right? You
Yeah,
are unable to change your behavior even when you know or someone tells you that there's a different path.
correct. So, in a way, Charlie Harper serves as a perfect cautionary tale about the limitations of quantitative hedonism. The show isn't just celebrating his lifestyle, it's also showing the emptiness of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that takes us nicely to our next lens, which is existential nihilism, right? So we talked about hedonism, maximizing pleasure. I think another aspect is that his character embodies elements of existential nihilism, the philosophical position that life has no intrinsic meaning or value.
Most definitely. I mean, despite his carefree facade, there's this underlying emptiness to Charlie we've discussed already. But I think he treats his work just as a means to fund his lifestyle, not as something meaningful in itself.
Yeah, and he is talented there. There's no doubt about that. Remember how he knocks out those jingles in minutes
Yeah.
without any passion. It's just a way for him to make money for more pleasure. And he has absolutely rejected traditional sources of meaning, like most of the people have, like career fulfillment, family, long-term relationships. And Nietzsche talked about how once we figure out or recognize that life has no inherent meaning, there's another challenge in front of us. We're faced with the challenge of creating our own meaning.
Yes, and I mean, Charlie's response is essentially to say if nothing ultimately matters, I might as well enjoy myself. He's created a value system centered entirely around pleasure and avoiding pain or boredom.
By the way,
Yeah.
Alan is my favorite character out of the two
Fuck
and a
off.
half. And Alan still believes in traditional meaning structures, right? He wants to be a good father. He wants to have a successful career, and he wants to find a lasting relationship. Completely opposite to what Charlie stands for, right? Charlie has rejected everything.
But you know what? I mean, this is where it gets so interesting because the show subverts our expectations by sometimes, actually not sometimes, by many times suggesting Alan's adherence to conventional values hasn't made him any happier.
And this is again a foil, right? Two characters being shown, and both have different approaches to life. Charlie's hedonistic nihilism, like we talked about, and Alan's conventional value system of family, relationships, and all. But both are unhappy. So, what's the answer?
Very interestingly, and though again I will say this with a pinch of salt, I think the answer might lie with Jake, the half a man in that show, who's oblivious to the nonsense happening around him. He's living in the moment without Charlie's excessive indulgences or Alan's neurotic adherence to social expectations. There is this exchange with Charlie and Jake, which sort of sits in my head rent free, where Charlie asks Jake, "Are you hungry?" And he replies, "What are we having?" And Charlie says, "I don't know. That depends on whether you're hungry." Then Jake says, "That depends on what we're having."
Oh my
Then
god.
Charlie says, "What do you want?" Then Jake says, "What do you got?" And I mean, this is just the kind of exchange that I mean, it has to sit in my head rent free. And the
Yeah.
first 3 4 seasons, I think Jake was my favorite
Yeah.
character. But again, we might end up digressing because of Jake. Let's go back to Charlie's nihilism. It's
Yeah.
interesting how it manifests in his relationships. Since he doesn't believe in meaning or permanence, I think he treats women as temporary sources of pleasure rather than potential partners in creating shared meaning.
But there are moments, right? Like we talked about Chelsea and Mia. I think these were the two closest relationships
Yeah,
that he had. So he's yearning for more. Yearning, like it's my favorite word now. It's yearning.
yearning.
His relationship with Chelsea, for instance, it suggested that deep down he recognizes the emptiness of his life, of his nihilistic worldview. But he again lacks the philosophical framework or tools in his reservoir to change anything.
Yeah, which I think is a good segue to our third lens, which is Charlie's Machiavellian approach to social interactions. So beyond hedonism and nihilism, which I think is fairly intuitive
Yeah.
when it comes to Charlie Harper,
Mm.
there is the third angle which interested us as well a lot when we were researching about it, which is the Machiavellian philosophy of social strategies and manipulations.
Yeah, and Machiavelli is the prince, his most famous book, and like we suggest that everyone should go through it once. It's a difficult read, but well worth it. It's about political power, but it has more themes to it, right? It's about achieving your objectives through strategic manipulation and not a lot of emphasis on moral virtue, right? Is Charlie is essentially applying a lot of Machiavellian principles in his personal life.
Absolutely. I think Charlie doesn't operate according to conventional morality for sure,
Mm.
but according to what will get him what he wants, which is usually sex, comfort, alcohol, or in essence, avoiding responsibility.
Yeah, and just look at how he manipulates women, right? He will tell them exactly what they want to hear. He will create absolute elaborate lies, and he positions himself as whatever character will get him what he wants in that moment, right? And his relationship with Alan, his brother, is showing that as well. He allows Alan to live with him throughout these 8 seasons. Sometimes in between, he kicks him out as well. But he constantly reminds him of his dependent position.
Yeah.
And he's maintaining this power in the relationship through small humiliations here and there and controlling the household resources.
Yeah, I think what's particularly Machiavellian is Charlie's pragmatism as well. He doesn't get caught up in how things should be based on moral principles. He focuses entirely on what works to get him what he wants.
He is brilliant at manipulating situations for short term gains, but he lacks the emotional tools and the vision to build anything lasting, whether a relationship or a career.
I think it's a very good point to talk about this other, and she is, I think, my favorite character of Two and a Half Men. She's neither of the two or the half man. That's Bota, right? Who's the house help. And it's interesting to talk about her right now because she sees through his
Yeah.
Machiavellian tactics and often calls him out,
Yeah.
creating this fantastic power dynamic where, let alone being manipulated by Charlie, she's the one who like fucking owns the room, right?
Yeah. She is a very dominating character, right? Quite
Yeah.
different from any other side characters in the show. But what about Rose, right? She's also quite interesting because she sees through his Machiavellianism as well. And in the long run, she outmaneuvers him. And she is indeed playing the long game throughout the 8th season, let's say. And Charlie is just focused on short term gratification.
Yeah, you're right. The show seems to suggest that Machiavellian tactics might work in the short term, but they eventually create their own problems
Yeah.
for Charlie. Like, uh, people catch on, resentments build, and manipulation creates isolation rather than connection, right? What we see
Yeah.
with Charlie.
And this is what happened to his character throughout, right? He did so much of these manipulations, that eventually it left him with people who resent him, like Alan, or are manipulating him right back, like Rose, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. But I think, Vishal, beyond pure philosophy, I think we need to look at the psychological underpinnings of
Hmm.
Charlie's character as well, right? Particularly, I would say his narcissism and attachment issues.
Yeah, and there's no two hoots about that. He's a narcissist, and he displays classic traits of a narcissistic personality.
Perfectly explains why Charlie
Yeah.
prefers a one night stand over a committed relationship, right? Each
Yeah.
conquest temporarily boosts his narcissistic
Yeah.
supply without requiring any vulnerability in the long term. Like his philosophy of life isn't just about maximizing pleasure, it's about avoiding the pain of rejection and abandonment that he might have experienced in the childhood.
And you see it clearly, right? So Evelyn, Charlie, and Alan, both are her sons, but they respond to her differently to the same maternal figure, right? Alan is needy and approval seeking, while Charlie has built walls and he avoids any kind of vulnerability at all costs.
Yeah, I'm so glad that because Two and a Half Men is just like seen as such a lowbrow show, right?
Yeah.
Like a below par IQ show. I'm just really happy that we've been able to, I don't know, unravel so many things about this character, which truly makes me think that even if Charlie Sheen didn't believe it, but Charlie Harper was for
Wow.
sure not a one-dimensional character. I think for me, very, very tough to pick the favorite moments of Two and a Half Men because honestly, I think almost all episodes, at least between season 1 to 5, something or the other bizarre is going on
Yeah.
in each of them. And truly, I'd be very spoiled for choice. But then there's this one scene in episode 2 where Charlie tells Alan that he's had a conversation about sex with Jake using cupcake, the word cupcake as a euphemism. And then Alan and Charlie proceed to have this conversation, which really does define the show for me in hindsight, of course,
Yeah.
and somewhat touches upon everything that we have spoken about today. Like, so for example, in that scene, Alan goes, "From now on, all cupcake conversations will be referred to me." And Charlie goes, "Why? You don't know the difference between a ding dong and your elbow."
Yeah.
And then Alan says, not refuting that point, he says, "Nevertheless, I do not want him to learn.
Nevertheless.
Nevertheless," like I don't know, like the over the top queen that he is.
Yeah.
"Nevertheless, I do not want him learning about relationships from a misogynist." Post which Charlie proceeds to look up the word in the dictionary and retorts, "I do not hate women. I'm the opposite of a misogynist. I'm a prosogynist. I love women." To which Alan quips, "Even if there is no possibility to have sex with them?" Then Charlie is like so confused. He's like, he doesn't understand the question. He doesn't understand this realm where such a concept would exist. And then Alan, quick to quip again, "Exactly. And it is precisely this attitude that I do not want my son Jake to grow up with." But I think Charlie has a pretty well thought of response, which seriously makes you think. And he says, "So you'd rather he grows up like you, scared
Yeah.
of women,
Yeah.
manipulated by women."
Yeah.
Then he says, "Say anything about me, but at least I've never chosen women in my life who do nothing but mistreat me."
Yeah.
And that becomes such a perfect segue for Berta to walk in and scream at Charlie, "Hey, stud, I do not know what kind of a sick and twisted party you had in your bedroom, but I sure as
Oh
hell
my
ain't
god.
cleaning that up." And
Yeah.
it's such a beautiful scene because it just talks about what the show is really
Yeah.
all about from a philosophical lens.
I think for me, one of my favorite scenes would be, if you remember, we talked about Lydia, right? Yeah, Lydia
Yeah.
meets Charlie's mother, Evelyn. And
Oh, yeah.
people who don't remember Lydia, it's okay. There have been so many of them in Charlie's life. But just for your memories, recall Lydia was the girl which had this uncanny resemblance with Evelyn, right? Uh, and Evelyn and Lydia had such a banter there, right? And she asks him because she sees what's happening here, right? She is more, I would say, philosophically mature than Charlie and uh, Alan, because generally women are more philosophically mature. And she asks him, "Hey, Lydia, what do you do besides my son?" And Lydia is like, "I'm in real estate." And Evelyn said, "So am I." Oh, and then Lydia remembers, "Oh yeah, Evelyn Harper. I recognize you from your bus bench ads, and people all over town are sitting on your face." And then Evelyn says, "Well, dear, maybe someday, if you work hard, people will be sitting on your face too." How long have you been seeing this lovely woman, Charlie? Charlie is, of course, befuddled, not able to answer. And then Lydia says, "Charlie, you don't remember when we first met?" And then now at this point of time, Evelyn and Lydia, they start to form this camaraderie, right? And she says the way he drinks, there's a good chance he doesn't remember coming down the stairs. And then Lydia asks, did his father drink as well? And Charlie, looking at both of them, says, what chance did he have? And then Evelyn is, Charlie, there's no need to be snide. And then Lydia is again pointing to Charlie, hey, stand up straight. I mean, it's at this point of time, you are not able to recognize
Tell them apart.
Evelyn and who's Lydia. And I think that was the point of this scene.
So then I remember when they're both gone, Charlie still doesn't get the uncanny resemblance. To which Berta says something which I will never forget. She says, come on, Charlie, the only difference between those two broads was you came out of one and you're going inside the other. Oh my God, wow. I mean, only Berta can speak this way. But there are some pretty adorable moments as well on the show. Of course, even I say that they are adorable, they're still lubricated with a lot of alcohol. There's a scene where Charlie is going to go and perform for the kids, if you remember, on stage. But then he's terrified because he has a stage fright, which he sort of remembered or which he got in class 7th, and since then he's apparently never performed on stage. But just before the concert, he starts drinking. Then he's very happy, he's ecstatic, and he tells Alan, I knew what was wrong in the 7th grade, I wasn't drinking. And then he belts out these pretty amazing jingles on the stage. There's this one called Sippy Cup.
I drink from a sippy cup, sippy cup, sippy cup. I drink from a sippy cup because I'm a big kid now. Come on!
This one called Maple Loops. This is the one which he actually sang the first time when he met Chelsea. Because he also started using Jake to get women in supermarkets.
I remember.
And then there's Maple Loops, which is
It's got oats and corn and wheat. It's the sweetest breakfast treat.
It's maple, delicious.
You saw a totally different side of Charlie, because in this one, his fear of stage fright. Like, I wouldn't have guessed that he has stage fright. Right? You can't guess the kind of person that he is. Like, one final moment that really stands out for me which is more of a philosophical conversation between him and Alan, is when I think in season 4 or something, they're sitting on the deck and Alan asks him that, don't you ever want someone to grow old with? And Charlie is drinking his whiskey in the morning, of course, and he says that, I don't need someone to grow old with, Alan. I need someone to make me forget I'm getting old. And this is a small conversation, but this one has stuck with me, because this is what he is, right? He doesn't want to get old. He wants to live in the moment, and he's embodying that philosophy that life is short. Don't waste it being miserable or sober if you can help it, right? We have matured after researching on this, and now we know that this Charlie Harper is not just a one-dimensional playboy character, right? He represents a complex philosophical position, as someone who has rejected conventional meaning and morality, but still struggles with that emptiness that ensues in his life.
That's true. I mean, his character serves both as a fantasy of unrestricted pleasure and a cautionary tale about the limitations of it.
Yeah, indeed. And so, whether you love him, hate him, he will force you to question your assumptions about pleasure, meaning, and what actually leads to a happy and fulfilling life.
That's true. Thank you so much, guys, viewers and our listeners, for joining us for another episode of Real Philosophy. Next time, we'll be analyzing another beloved character through these philosophical lenses.
Yeah. And until then, keep questioning, keep analyzing, and maybe enjoy a drink on the beach while you're at it.
But remember, in the immortal words of Charlie Harper, alcohol may be a temporary solution for some, but it is only temporary if you stop drinking.
Mohit, this is not the takeaway we want to give our listeners to.
Of course, man, I'm just kidding. But the real lesson is, of course, that pleasure without meaning leads to emptiness, and manipulation leads to isolation. Charlie's tragedy is that he occasionally glimpses this truth, but unfortunately cannot change his patterns.
That's more like it. See you next time, everyone. Ciao.
See you guys. Ciao.